The traitor legions epitomize the greatest flaws and failures of humanity's character. Conquering the stars and destined as the harbingers of a glorious future of prosperity, even those chosen to carry the Emperor's Aquila as a symbol of his favor fell to the vices and false promises offered by the ruinous powers. For today, we shall elucidate the myriad sons of the Third Legion, whose pursuit of perfection inevitably led down the path of hedonistic depravity. The sons of the Phoenician, the Emperor's children.
A warrior is measured by the quality of the foes he defeats. For years we have blunted our blades against lesser species and backwards primitives. But now this war, this glorious cataclysm, it presents us a chance to display for all eternity our perfection in the arena of war against the most formidable foe we shall ever face, our brother legionaries. And for this, we humbly thank him, our dear father, whose name we carry. The Primarchs of his Imperium were each crafted to exemplify the Emperor's, and by extension, humanity's greatest virtues and traits. Statesmen, generals, and orators, these individuals would unite the disparate fragments of humanity by using their unique godlike power. Yet many of the Primarchs would fall from grace, with few more unfortunate than that of one of the most promising of his children, the Primarch of the Third Legion, Fulgrim. With the scattering of the Primarchs prior to the dawn of the Great Crusade, the gestation pod of the Primarch of the Third Legion would land on the mining world of Kimos. A bleak and pitiless world surrounded by a nebula of thick dust and soot, Kimos would be a harsh taskmaster of its people. Settled during the Dark Age of technology, the planet would be isolated by warp storms from the wider civilizations across the stars. Illuminated in perpetual twilight, Kimos' citizenry would labor day and night without pause to create enough resources for their survival. Thick with harmful vapors, the fortress factories of the world would demand ceaseless toil from its people, should they all wish to prevent a global starvation. With trade almost impossible between neighboring planets, the Kimosians would accept their dour fate of doomed rationing and endless hard labor. Yet with the arrival of the Primarch to the planet, a renewal of its fortunes would commence. Discovering the beautiful child, the policing force known as the Caretakers would beg Kimos' leaders of Kallax, the Executives, to spare the child's life. Orphans of Kimos were routinely culled to prevent further strain on the planet's dwindling resources. Yet fortunately for the young Primarch, the Executives would allow a member of the Caretakers to raise the child. Naming the boy Fulgrim after the Kimosian legend, it would not be long before the young Primarch would be tasked to labor within the mines of his new homeworld. Maturing quickly, Fulgrim would be sent to work within the labor mines of the planet. Quickly understanding the faltering and obsolete equipment of the factory, Fulgrim would modify and improve upon their designs. Dramatically increasing the machine's yield, it would not take long for the executives of the factory to take notice of the genius child diligently improving the lot of his people. For 15 years, Fulgrim would tinker with the machinery and be promoted to the rank of an executive of the fortress factory of Kallax. Observing the plight of the factory workers in a new light, Fulgrim would train and organize engineers to travel with him to each neighboring factory. Under his guidance, the engineers would repair and improve the factory's machinery. Salvaging long-dormant artifacts from the Age of Strife, the mining production of the planet would exponentially improve. Allowing for free time to construct new machines to further improve efficiency to the factories, Fulgrim would overhaul the entire planet's infrastructure and living standards. Creating surpluses and reducing pollution, Kimos' trade routes would begin to burgeon, and within a few years, Fulgrim had ascended to become the ruler of the planet. The only Primarch to rule his homeworld with peaceful means, Fulgrim would prove to be a compassionate, kind, and dependable boon to the people of Kimos. Yet with the arrival of the Emperor of Mankind to the planet, Fulgrim would resign his mantle of rulership. Falling to his knees once in audience of the master of mankind, Fulgrim would pledge himself and his homeworld in service to the Imperium. Swearing to serve the needs of his Imperium with all his heart, Fulgrim would accompany his father to Holy Terra. Learning of the slow decline of the Third Legion in his absence, Fulgrim would address his remaining 200 Astartes. So inspiring was his speech, the Emperor would give the title of Emperor's Children to the Third Legion and gift them the right to bear his own Imperial Aquila on their armor. Wearing the double-headed eagle with pride, the Emperor's Children, under the command of Fulgrim, would venture forth to prove their worth in the eyes of the Imperium. Burdened with the responsibility to prove themselves worthy of the Emperor's favor, Fulgrim and his legion would strive to become paragons of humanity. Seeking perfection in not only battle, but also culture, the Emperor's Children would champion artistry and aesthetic splendor in their dealings as a legion. Embodying the traits of beauty, poise, and elegance, Fulgrim would demand a high standard of regal bearing within his legion. Strengthening their resolve and bolstering their dwindling numbers, the Emperor's Children would serve as aristocratic negotiators and public embodiments of the Imperium's will. Mentored closely by the Primarch of the Lunar Wolves, Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's foremost senior general would teach Fulgrim and his slowly rebuilding legion on the arts of war. With his teachings complete, and the Third Legion now at fighting strength, Fulgrim would anxiously embark to bring glory to his Emperor's Children. Forming an unlikely, yet cherished friendship with the Primarch of the 10th Legion, Ferrus Manus, during the Great Crusade, the Emperor's most starkly contrasting brothers would work together on many campaigns to bring compliance to the galaxy. Both masters of craftsmanship, alchemy, and scientific genius, the Primarchs would further strengthen their bond with a contest of skill. Crafting weapons fit for a god of war, the Phoenician and his affectionately named Gorgon would create weapons of legendary splendor. Ferrus Manus would craft the sword known as Fireblade, wreathed in flame alike to the Emperor's own personal weapon, whilst Fulgrim would construct Forgebreaker, a warhammer capable of sundering mountains in hands strong enough to wield it. Deferring each other as the winner of the contest, as a sign of respect, the two Primarchs would gift one another their mastercrafted weapons. Carrying them into battle, legends would be sung of the two like-minded brothers charging into battle with their weapons aloft and legions at their vanguard. Yet unfortunately, such a bond would be tested and fractured with the betrayal of the Imperium by the Primarch of the 16th Legion, Horus Lupercal. As the War Master of the Imperium began his slow descent into the thrall of chaos, Fulgrim would begin his own corrupting pilgrimage. Leading the 28th Expeditionary Fleet during the conquest of the Laren species, Fulgrim would begin to be enticed by the influence of the ruinous powers. Known to the Imperium as the planet 28-3, the Lair Xenos would guard the resource-rich planet from Imperial advances. Dispatching his Astartes, Fulgrim would descend upon the planet and begin the slow month-long extermination of the serpentine Laren Xenos. Discovering a strange temple within the coral nexus of the ocean planet, Fulgrim would investigate the structure. Unknowingly stepping into a temple devoted to the chaos entity known as Slaanesh, Fulgrim would find within the heart of the temple a peculiar artifact. The Demon Blade, known as the Blade of the Lair, would call to Fulgrim. Whispering subtle treacheries into Fulgrim's very soul, the Primarch of the Emperor's Children would claim the blade as his own. Relegating Fireblade, his most prized symbol of his most cherished brother, and favoring the Lair Blade in battle, the influence of the greater demon within the sword would grow exponentially. Wrongly interpreting the intrusive thoughts of the demon as his own subconscious, Fulgrim's descent into madness would be assured. With Horus Lupercal's corruption by the ruinous powers complete, the War Master of Chaos would call to his likewise damned brother to join his betrayal of the Imperium. Heeding the call of his brother and once mentor, Fulgrim would begin his ever-worsening descent into madness with the persecution of the Diasporex. The Iron Hands, led by their Primarch Ferrus Manus, would be tasked with achieving compliance with the human elements of the Xenos-Human coalition known as the Diasporex. With the Diasporex declining the invitation to join the Imperium, the Iron Tenth would begin their purge of the civilization. Competent in naval warfare, the Diasporex would prove a difficult foe to destroy. Calling to his most stalwart allies, Ferrus would petition aid from Fulgrim and the 3rd Legion to add their blades to the fight. Together, the Iron Hands and Emperor's Children would crush the Diasporex, but not without Fulgrim's ego being damaged due to his own reckless actions. The malevolent influence of the Lair Blade would feed Fulgrim's resentment of his brother's selfless and heroic actions to aid his forces. With the Diasporex slain, Fulgrim would travel to the ancient Eldar craftworld of Ulthwé and be confronted by the Asavani Farseer, Eldrad Ulfrain. Warning Fulgrim of the War Master's impending betrayal, Fulgrim would, with the influence of the Lair Blade, unleash his outrage at the Eldar's accusations of his cherished brother. With the aid of his Phoenix Guard, Fulgrim would slaughter Eldrad's Eldar retinue and cause the Farseer to retreat. Ordering his fleet to virus bomb several Eldari worlds, Fulgrim's rage would not be sated. Seeking answers from Horus in person, Fulgrim would, despite his objections to Eldrad's assertions, succumb to the charisma and charm of the War Master and join in his plot for rebellion. His respect for his second closest brother, enough to turn his back on the Emperor. Promised true perfection should he submit to the powers of chaos, Fulgrim would meet once more with his most adored brother, Ferrus Manus, in an attempt to sway the Iron Tenth to join the traitor cause. Upon the world of Kalanides IV, the Iron Hands wrested control of the planet from the Orc menace. Meeting with Ferrus Manus, Fulgrim would naively declare his allegiance to the plot to destroy the Imperium. Enraged, the stalwart hero of humanity, Ferrus Manus would attack Fulgrim. His duty to the Imperium and loyalty to the Emperor as unshakable as iron, Ferrus would destroy his once bond of kinship, Fireblade, from Fulgrim's grasp with his own hands. With the sword's destruction, Ferrus would be incapacitated, with Fulgrim taking his own craft, Forgebreaker, in his hands. Unable to slay his brother, Fulgrim would settle for slaughtering the Gorgon's Morlock honor guard. The Emperor's children would submit to the thrall of the being known as Slaanesh, and with their mutated bodies and souls, reinforce the War Master's staging ground of the Istvan system. With Horus's betrayal laid bare for all to see, the Emperor would dispatch his remaining loyal sons to bring the traitors to justice. Spoiling for revenge, Ferrus Manus would lead the charge to Istvan V. Alongside the Salamanders and Raven Guard legions, the Loyalists would face the traitors in battle. Against the World Eaters, Death Guard, Sons of Horus, and their own most hated foe, the Emperor's children, the Iron Hands would seek to destroy the Phoenician and his ilk. Yet as the second wave of reinforcements to the battle arrived, the legion sent to purge the traitors to the throne would instead join them. The Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion would turn on the Loyalists and outnumber their forces with overwhelming firepower. Ferrus Manus, betrayed once more, would face his beloved brother, Fulgrim, in battle. Armed with the reforged Fireblade, Ferrus Manus would make a desperate final act to avenge his honor guard, lost friendship, and the memory of his once virtuous brother. Upon the Urgal Depression, Fulgrim and Ferrus would clash, yet armed with the demonically imbued Demon Blade, Fulgrim would cleave Ferrus's head from his body with a slice of the Lair Blade. As if awakening from a deep slumber, Fulgrim would look upon his slain brother and grieve at his heinous actions. Stricken with grief, Fulgrim would submit to the whispers of the Lair Blade, which promised to absolve him from his sorrows. Freed from its prison, the greater demon would possess Fulgrim's body and imprison the Phoenician's soul. Now replaced by the demon of the Lair Blade, Fulgrim would exponentially hasten the corruption of the Emperor's children. Revealing itself to the War Master, Horus and the demon would reach an understanding that it shall remain in control of the Phoenician's body should it continue to aid the traitor war effort. Gifting the severed head of the first Primarch to fall during the heresy, Ferrus Manus, the demonically possessed Fulgrim would join the remaining 7 Primarchs of the traitor cause at the conclave above Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word Bearers Legion, would observe the presence within Fulgrim and attempt to exorcise it from the Phoenician's body. Failing to dominate the being, Lorgar would weaken the demon's hold on its prey, yet withdraw from the Conclave, unsuccessful in his attempt to free his brother. Upon the Emperor's Children flagship, Pride of the Emperor, the senior members of the 3rd Legion would continue efforts to exorcise their Primarch. Under the supervision of the Chief Apothecary, Fabius Bile, Captains Lucius, Julius Caesaron, and Marius Virosian would begin their ministrations. Freeing their Gene-Father from the demon's clutches, Fulgrim would reveal himself to be biding his time and understanding the creature from within. Spurred to take the demon unawares, Fulgrim would dominate the entity and resume control of his body. Now armed with an intimate understanding of the foul inner workings of demonology, Fulgrim would petition aid from the 4th Legion Primarch, Perturabo, to accompany him on a journey to explore his newfound understanding. A journey to the Crone World of Idris. Alongside the Iron Warriors, the Emperor's Children would venture into the heart of the Eye of Terror. Promising the Lord of Iron a wondrous power of immense value within the Ocularis Terribus, Fulgrim would not divulge the true intention behind their voyage. Despite enduring an ambush perpetrated by the shattered Legion Astartes of the vessel Sisypheum, the Primarchs would continue their traversal to the Crone World. Upon the world of Idris, Fulgrim would discover the tomb of the so-called Angel Exterminatus within the sepulchre of Isha's Doom. The distilled essence of the countless perished souls rent from the birth of She Who Firsts, the orb of jade light would shine ablaze alike to a miniature sun. Draining strength from his brother, Perturabo, Fulgrim would harvest the power of the Hollow World and the Lord of Iron to achieve his apotheosis. Reborn as a demon prince of Slaanesh, Fulgrim's skin would mutate into a 4-armed, serpentine creature. Departing from the planet with his Emperor's Children, Fulgrim's ascension would be bought at the cost of the ever-dwindling loyalty of his brothers. Further influencing his legion to become ever more debased and mutated, Fulgrim would wage war for the remainder of the Horus Heresy as a distracted, stimuli-obsessed monster. For even during the final battle of the war, the Siege of Terror, Fulgrim and his legion would busy themselves not with direction, discipline or focus, but with the torture and mutilation of the civilian populace. The traitor war effort would fail, in part due to the 3rd Legion's wanton indulgencies, and force Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children to retreat into the Eye of Terror. Abusing and depleting their captured slaves, the Emperor's Children would seek new prey to enact their perversions. Fulgrim would lead his fragmented and wayward sons to ever more heretical pursuits of indulgences. The traitors would turn on one another, as all duplicitous betrayers unbound from honor and discipline are wont to do. With the Legion Wars incurring a heavy toll on every traitor legion, the Emperor's Children would not be spared such losses. Devolving into small war bands, Fulgrim's lack of leadership or grand objective would divide his once proud legion. Though whilst the 3rd Legion may be divided and without direction, the Demon Primarch's influence still brings ruination to the galaxy. Confronted by the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Rabute Guilliman, during the scouring of the traitors, following their failed coup, Fulgrim would prove to be a dangerous foe. During 121.M31, the 13th Legion would seek retribution from the Emperor's Children at the Battle of Fassala. Dueling the Ultramarines Primarch in single combat, Fulgrim would prove to be a deadly opponent, and with his chaos-infused form, slice the throat of Rabute Guilliman with a poison-infused blade. Damning Guilliman to a 10,000-year stasis-fueled slumber within Macragge's Temple of Correction, the Phoenicians' actions would deal the Imperium a fatal blow which would be felt for millennia. Yet with the return of the Avenging Sun during 999.M41, Rabute Guilliman's resurgent wrath demands vengeance against the Phoenician. And despite his long seclusion within the Eye of Terror, rumor persists that the chosen demon Primarch of Slaanesh once more unites his legion for war. His never-ending quest for his debased pleasures once more unleashed upon the galaxy.
That which causes us trials shall yield us triumph. That which makes our hearts ache shall fill us with gladness, for the only true happiness is to learn, to advance and improve. None of this could happen without rejecting error, ignorance and imperfection. We must pass out of the darkness to reach the light.
If a man dedicates his life to good deeds and the welfare of others, he will die unthanked and unremembered. If he exercises his genius, bringing misery and death to billions, his name will echo through the millennia for 100 lifetimes. Infamy is always more preferable to ignominy.
The warriors of the Astartes incur grievous injuries, both physical and mental in nature. Wading through the obscene violence, unbearable torment, and the enticements of thirsting gods, even those blessed by the Emperor's gifts can bleed and require attending by those blessed with the methods of healing and repairing his angels' wounds. Yet many healers charged with the safety and health of the Space Marines have forsworn their oaths to safekeep their brethren, and armed with knowledge and insatiable curiosity, have eschewed their duty to the master of mankind in order to pursue their own experiments. For today, we shall elucidate the tale of a genius mind, corrupted not by the machinations of the Immaterium, but rather the unquenchable thirst for innovation with no regard for ethics. A renegade known far and wide across the stars as Clone Lord, Primogenitor, and even the Spider, Fabius Bile. With the birth of the nascent Imperium during the heady days of the 30th millennium, a new era dawned for humanity. The Emperor, ruler of the crucible of mankind's origin world, had waged his wars of unification across the war-torn surface of Terra. His armies never faltering in their purge of those who would deny the vision of a united species. Among the first continents of old Earth, Northern Europa would pledge its fealty to the new ruler of the throne world. The aristocracy tithing their sons to be drafted into the genesis of a new breed of warriors. Among the minor noble house of Ingolstadt, a boy of unfathomable promise would be assigned as an aspirant of the 3rd Legion. Bearing a voracious appetite for knowledge, the young blonde-haired, purple-eyed youth spent much of his time listening to music within the library of his household, reading from leather-bound books. Learning basic arts of fleshcrafting from servants of his family's court, little would anyone know that the boy modifying the behavior of mice to duel one another in fights to the death would one day craft beings of absolute cruelty and purpose. Following the blight of their gene seed, whittling the Legion's numbers to only 200 surviving Astartes, the Space Marine known as Fabius would be thrust into a position of prominence under the stewardship of Legion Master Thralas. Appointed as an apothecary of the Legion, due to all others of superior skill and seniority perishing due to the sabotage conducted by the Selenar gene cults of Luna. Seeking a means to remove the taint of the blight from his Terran kin and even his own body, Fabius toiled relentlessly and would earn the nickname Spider from his peers. Taking samples from his cancer-riddled fallen kin, the fate of those proven imperfect due to their infection would be punishable by death, and as such the Spider of the 3rd Legion switched a sample of his flesh with a fellow healthy battle brother as an act of misdirection. Buying time to find a means of a cure, as Bile gathered samples of those taken by the Blight, all hope of deliverance from his fate was not forthcoming. Meeting with his reunited Primarch, Fulgrim, upon the mining world of Chemos, Fabius would soon earn praise from his gene sire due to his efforts to ensure the Legion's survival. Promoted to the rank of Chief Apothecary as the Great Crusade continued and the Legion began to burgeon, the Chemosian recruits which swelled their number were bereft of the Blight. Soon the Terrans of the Legion would diminish to the point where only a handful carried its deadly imprint within their gene coding. Fabius still struggled to contain the deadly curse within his bloodstream, yet for his veterancy and faultless service made in the name of his Legion, his Primarch entrusted more power to his favored son. Given the rank of Lieutenant Commander of the Emperor's Children, Fabius now held a position to lead thousands of his subordinate battle brothers as among the most powerful space marines, not just within his legion, but the entirety of the Legiones Astartes. Yet even this prestigious pedigree would pale in his duty to unearth new discoveries and epiphanies when wielding his surgeon scalpel. His men were not comrades nor kinsmen in Fabius's eyes. They were little more than specimens to dissect and improve, mere notes in a symphony he would one day complete. Ambition had stirred within the chief apothecary's heart, for such was his ambition that he sought to one day surpass the Emperor's own genius, yet to openly announce such hubris would earn the Spider of the Third Legion only censure and ignominy. Soon, however, a chance to test his genius, unfettered by the Imperium's oversight, would present itself, and Fabius would not allow such an opportunity to go to waste. Upon the world of Laren, the Emperor's children began their path to damnation. Purging the ocean world of native Xenos threats, within a temple devoted to the ruinous powers, the Phoenician found upon the Blade of the Lair. Within its confines, the strange weapon bore a malign entity of the warp, and with time whispered deceptions into the mind of Fulgrim. As the rot set within the Third Legion, Fabius in turn aided their descent into madness as he gleaned insight from the dissection of the Laren Xenos. Modifying his legion's gene seed with adaptations of the Laren, the species showed signs of intense genetic manipulations through some unknown means, with which Bile found inescapably alluring. Given sanction from his slowly corrupting Primarch to facilitate surgeries among the ranks of the Emperor's children, Fabius's experiments saw to the implantation of vocal cord augmetics upon the arrogant Lord Commander, Eidolon. Proving invaluable during the conflict of the rebellion of Istvan III, Eidolon's sonic scream ripped the war singer of the battlefield's form to shreds, as his stalwart subordinate, Captain Saul Tarvitz, looked on in horror. Saving the life of the battle captain of the 14th Legion, Nathaniel Garrow, Bile's actions, though damning his legion and future generations to their infamous bloody deeds, would also allow for a hero of the Imperium to slip the net. Complicit in his kin's betrayal of the Imperium, following the atrocity of Istvan III, Fabius worked diligently on altering the bodies of his battle brothers. Aiding in the creation of abominations such as the First Noise Marines, Bile's alterations of their nervous systems replaced all feelings of pain with sensations of pleasure. Monsters capable of among the greatest heresies known to man, Bile's first disgusting experiments would be unleashed during the reprisal of the Loyalists upon the soil of Istvan V. Watching in horror as the once proud warriors of the Phoenician faced them in battle, the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard combated the disfigured and despicable scions of She-Who-Firsts. Bile himself had surmised that only a single year remained of his own struggle with the Blight, yet would never surrender to the whims of profane so-called gods such as Slaanesh. Confessing his affliction to his Primarch, with the blessing of Fulgrim, the Spider had more than earned a reprieve from war to continue his own studies to preserve his life. Leaving his legion to busy themselves with their endless pursuit of pleasure and vendettas against the Imperium, Fabius could not waste time while the Blight continued to ravage his body. Researching forbidden techniques on genetic engineering sealed within the choral conclaves of Istvan V, his experiments of the chaos-corrupted war singers would provide the first insights to prolong his existence. Exorcising the demon of the Lair Blade from the body of his Primarch, with the Phoenician's faculties returned, Fulgrim had one demand in mind as penance for his leniency. Cloning the Primarch of the Iron Hands, Ferrus Manus, using fragments of his corpse, Fulgrim's most cherished brother would be instrumental in winning the civil war should an acceptable clone be converted to their cause. Despite creating dozens of ever more perfected copies of the Gorgon, Fabius regardless failed in his mission to change the indomitable yet fractured mind of these pretender Primarchs. Utilizing his newfound expertise to ever more incredible feats of biological marvels, with the decapitation of the Lord Commander of the Legion, Eidolon, Bile brought the narcissistic commander back from the grave. Depravity ran rampant as the laws of life and death continued to diminish, for Fabius's scalpels and medicinal concoctions defied all conventions of ethics and morality. Torturing captured space marines of both sides of the divide of the Civil War, a new breed of warriors would be forged. The Terrata, the first breed of Bile's mission to transcend the human form into the next stage of evolution, while physically stronger, were regardless harried by rampant mutations and mental instability. Their violent outbursts aiding the degenerate legion during the final battle of the Horus Heresy, the Siege of Terra, did little to help the Emperor's children's flagrant disregard for orders, command, or discipline. As the 3rd Legion captured civilians of the Administratum, Bile conducted vile experiments of those brought to his surgeon's table. Rendering their bodies down into stimulants, intoxicants, and other horrific concoctions, Slaanesh salivated at the sheer decadence facilitated by the mad scientist of Europa. Bile's curiosity and need for answers insatiable, his rejection of the dark gods did little to prevent feeding their own hunger for suffering. As the siege failed to bring about the destruction of the Imperial Palace, the traitors retreated from the throne world with the death of the War Master of Chaos. Fabius took little heed for such a defeat, and despite Fulgrim's proclamation of a bounty for the death of the Spider, Bile continued his dark experiments as he plumbed the depths of heresy. Garbed in a suit of artificer armor, flooding his bloodstream with painkillers and powerful stimulants, the demonic entity known as the Chirurgeon inhabits his back-mounted surgeon's tools as it pumps life-enriching ichor through his ancient body. Carrying the Rod of Torment, once belonging to the demon prince Shalaklak, the Marquis of Mutilation, its merest touch causes its victims to writhe in agony. Armed with a Zyklos Needler, fitted with strange, corrosive and virulent vile concoctions, the Spider continues his endless quest for knowledge by firing untested compounds upon his foes. Forming his own warband and recruiting several orphaned apothecaries of traitor legions to his fold, the self-styled Primogenitor clung to a twisted form of the Imperial truth as the unfolding phenomena of the warp and its denizens continued to corrupt real space. Truth is his championed virtue, with innovation as a close second. For while the Legion wars erupted within the Eye of Terror between the fragmented hordes of the War Master's armies, a new opportunity presented itself. Horus Lupercal had failed in bringing about a new age for humanity in service to the Dark Gods, yet Fabius knew that a chance for a renewed continuation of the Civil War could be achieved. Whilst amassing his new men into armies of utterly loyal genetic atrocities to fight at his whim, Fabius constructed vast flesh refineries across the surface of Arden 9. Known by the inhabitants of the system as Manflayer for his practice of stitching a long lab coat from the skin of his enemies, Bile forced such still-living skinless victims to carry the excess of his garment behind him, alike to a grotesque bridal train. His experiments destroyed with the intervention of the Salamander's chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, Bile fled to the confines of the warp, rather than suffer a painful death by immolation. Drifting into the Eye of Terror, after seeming ages, Fabius's vessel happened upon a long-ruined crone world known as Urum. Besieged by the battle-scarred traitor legions, as the need for skilled apothecaries was at its greatest need, Fabius cloned several mutated warriors in exchange for resources to further his own projects. Horus's long war would suffocate without the retrieval and reintegration of the Chaos Space Marine's precious gene seed, and none were more qualified to extract and reimplant such genetic materials. Assuming command of the Emperor's Children Legion with their abandonment of their Primarch Fulgrim, the fortress of the Canticle City on the demon world of Harmony would prove a fitting bastion for Bile to continue his work. Furthering his works first started with the cloning of Ferrus Manus, the Spider continued to unravel the mysteries of the Emperor's greatest works of gene crafting. Creating a genetic copy of each and every one of the Primarchs of the Imperium, his finest creation would be that of the War Master. stealing Horus Lupercal's body from the world of Malium, should the champion of chaos once more unite the tattered fragments of the traitor legions, a chance to dethrone the Emperor may still yet be accomplished. Confronted by the former first captain of the Sons of Horus, Ezekiel Abaddon, the reprisal of the returned pilgrim of the 16th Legion would be swift. Assaulting harmony with the founders of what would become his accursed Black Legion, Abaddon, whilst wielding the weapon of his Genefather, the Talon of Horus, did slay the returned Warmaster, destroying Fabius's clones to prevent them from upsetting the balance of power which he would claim for himself. Abaddon the Despoiler took his rightful place as the new Warmaster of Chaos and begrudgingly spared the life of the Clone Lord. Hunted by the now fractured Emperor's children, Craftworld Eldari, and even the Phoenician, Bile had no choice but to evade capture and bide his time upon the world of Urum. Never again would Fabius be a pawn of the warlords of the traitor legions, for his purpose was of greater import than any would-be conqueror of the Void. Cloning himself into several copies, Bile's consciousness, regardless of his death, would live on within his replicas and prove to be a sufficient means to survive the millennia to follow. Truly independent as a free agent renegade, Bile's endless ventures of scientific discovery were now unconstrained by a single vessel. Fabius was now Legion, and with no limit to his sadistic and amoral experiments. Several apothecaries flocked to learn the secrets he so meticulously guarded. Forming the Consortium, this band of misfit apothecaries pledged loyalty to their mentor, as the near unkillable Primogenitor set his eyes to the future. Regardless of his perceived freedom to venture unfettered across the Void, many old compatriots attempted to sway the Spider to their cause. Oleander Ko, a former pupil of the 3rd Legion, requested aid from Bile to unite the Emperor's children into a legion once more. Unknowingly facilitating the plots of the Eldar during the shattering of the Craftworld Lugonoth of 764.M34, Fabius bristled at the manipulations he had endured and further determined to stay beyond the influence of the wars of the legions. Studying under the tutelage of the Homunculi of Commorragh, following his capture by the Drukhari during 796.M37, the Coven of the 13 Scars reveled in the Monkey, who displayed such promise for their sadistic arts. Aiding them in the construction of the Tower of Flesh, a fortress made of the remains of those who had defied the Coven, the runes carved into its walls and injection of elixirs made by Bile prevented the sentient structure from perishing. Enriched with knowledge never before imparted to a so-called lesser species, the teachings of the Homunculi of the Coven would be imparted by Fabius to his fellow Emperor's children kin. Angered by the Spider's unsanctioned teachings, during the Battle of Belial IV of 993.M37, the Coven slaughtered Bile's pupils and surgically altered the Spider's brain to prevent him from ever uttering the secrets he had learned. Not content with such debased and vile transgressions of ethics, another clone of the Primogenitor would venture to the Blood Angel's homeworld of Baal. Reeling from the impending assault of the Tyranid menace, Lord Commander Dante required a means to fend off the Great Devourer, to which the Spider would exploit. Under the guise of the Mechanicus Major Biologus, Haran Serpens, Fabius infiltrated the fortress monastery of the Arx Angelicum and convinced the apothecary Caesus to steal a vial of Sanguinius' blood for use in cloning a new breed of space marines. As chaos erupted with the creation of the fell blood fiends, Fabius spirited himself from Baal with the vitae of the Great Angel. Hounded by the Blood Angel Sergeant, Rathan the Ready, under orders from Lord Commander Dante to achieve vengeance for the desecration of the Red Grail, the Spider began his study of the blood of Sanguinius. Rathan and his Flesh Terror's allies located the laboratory of the Clone Lord upon the world of Deinonychus V, within the Ghoulstars region of space. Infested with the Tyranids, Fabius had managed to modify a zoanthrope of the species to prevent them from overrunning his facility and its many prison cells. With the capture of Rathan, the Blood Angel quickly found the fortress to contain several imprisoned space marines of numerous chapters, and in his escape attempts would confront the Spider. revealing his plans to clone a perfect copy of the Master of Mankind by identifying and reverse engineering the vitae of the Great Angel. Rathan the Ready would not stand for such obscene heresy committed by the Spider. Managing to slay Fabius several times and rallying the Astartes within to revolt against their oppressors, as the final copy of the Clone Lord stood atop the facility now besieged by the Great Devourer, the Scion of the Ninth achieved his vengeance. Retrieving the blood of the Great Angel and casting Fabius's body to the Tyranid swarms below, though the Spider would perish, many replicas, including his own purest form, continued their duties far from the conflict. For what is the destruction of a life's work to a being who transcends the bounds of mortality itself? The toil of the true inheritor of the Spider's psyche had continued to spread mutations across human settlements to burgeon his debased new men, and in the latter millennia of the Dark Imperium, continued to heighten his acts of heretical dabbling. Capturing members of the Custodian Guard and Sisters of Silence during the War of the Spider, his pilfering of the Death Guard relic, the Arcana Contagious, evoked the wrath of Typhus the Traveler and his allied warband of the Shriven. Exploiting every side of the battle, Bile managed to conduct tests on the Golden Host and Null Maidens before returning to Urim to analyze his findings. For 10,000 years, the Primogenitor had sired more children through his surgeries and experimentations than any mad genius of the Void. Strangely, for such a debased renegade, with ancient age, the Spider grew fond of the notion of his mutated breed of abominations seeking out refuge in the dark corners of the Void, and one day rising up as the next stage of humanity's legacy. Paternal to a fault, Fabius sought a means to assure his creations would live on, and continued to strive for a method to secure their thriving. Observing the Primaris Space Marines with piqued curiosity, the creations of the Archmagos Dominus, Belisarius Cawl, must be studied to uncover the methods used for their ascension. Not wanting to create mere chaos-corrupted simulacrums of their stature, the Spider required a pure subject to carry out his schemes of replicating their gene-forged superiority. Having already cloned a perfect body of his own Primarch, Fulgrim, yet allowed it to be traded to the Necron Overlord, Trazyn the Infinite. Despite his meticulous plans to redeem his legion and their Genesire's legacy, it had all ended in failure. Though untainted by chaos, the clone of Fulgrim still retained the flaws of ego and genetic memories of his past actions, as a pawn of the ruinous powers. Despite wishing to atone for its sins, the clone would not be allowed to further upset the balance of galactic unrest, and would therefore be imprisoned within the Infinite's gallery of Solemnus. Knowing in his heart that Fulgrim would once again descend onto the path of madness, only his new men could be salvaged as his own enduring legacy. Invading the Archmagos' vast flagship, the Zarquisator, during the Indomitus Crusade, Fabius, though seemingly seeking out the Sancprimus Portum, the genetic materials of the Emperor's Primarchs, sought a different prize. Alpha Primus, the prototype from which all Space Marines would be derived, had originally been an experiment to create a Primarch-like being from the Magna Mater genetic materials. Extrapolating backwards from his genetic code, such rich mutagenic materials would be valuable beyond measure to the Primogenitor. Ambushing Alpha Primus and extracting his progenoid glands from his body, Belisarius pleaded with the Spider to not end the life of his most cherished son. Sharing a mutual respect for their own genius and stature as gene-fathers, Bile allowed such a request to be abided, and once finished extracting the vital organs, retreated from the fray. Now equipped with bountiful knowledge and invaluable samples to implement within his new men, the Clone Lord's millennia of toil are close to their ultimate fruition. His fate destined to perish to the Blight, Fabius strives to complete his great works before his mind and body is ultimately claimed by his affliction, in order to bring forth a new era for mankind.
"You are Fabius Bile, if I am not mistaken,"
said Cawl. Bile turned from the object. The Servo Skull's eyes lit up Bile's with a red, infernal glow. "My reputation precedes me," He stood and moved on to something else that caught his eye, passing through a fragment of an Indranu nullfield generator mounted on a block. How Cole had come across the artifact and what significance it had once held for him, he had no idea.
You are the original, the genuine Pater Mutatis, not one of his clones.
Bile shrugged. Does it matter? They are me, I am them. Genius is all. Cole let out a bark of laughter that boomed through his maxillary shield.
They say I am arrogant, not unfairly, I suppose, but I think I may have met my match in that regard.
As Cole talked, he tasked one of his subminds to put a trace on the incoming hololith. Even though the signal had now come to a focal point, tracking it was surprisingly difficult. The feed was thin, weak, still scattered by the Avernus siblings' endless stellar bickering. Only clever modulation of the frequency allowed it to carry enough information to transmit Bile's semblance into the museum. One thing was sure, if Bile was using hololithic means for communication, he must be close. For a moment, Cole considered activating a shipwide alert, but decided that might well cause his unexpected guest to withdraw. Despite his misgivings, Cole found himself wanting to hear what this notorious heretic Astartes had to say. Bile smiled. I am arrogant. What genius is not? I am a genius like you. A wise man acknowledges what he is good at. You will find no false modesty in this room, I think. But he also acknowledges his failings. Acknowledgement of one's talents cannot be accompanied by blindness to one's shortcomings. Otherwise, the wise man is not wise at all.
How very humble,
said Cole. Humility is a virtue most of those born in our era neglect, Archmagos. I would venture that you have little time for it yourself.
Little,
Cole said.
I find humility gets in the way of my self-belief.
Bile pulled a thoughtful face. Take my friendly advice as one scientist to another. You should embrace humility. You should look within yourself with complete honesty. You will be better for acknowledging your fallibility.
I never said I was infallible.
You believe you are, though, said Bile, reaching out with a phantom hand and speculatively passing it through a glassite case and the broken skull inside. Take your great work, your Primaris Space Marines. Bile bent low, peering into the skull's empty eyes. I admit that I was excited to see the work of this supposed genius. You, I mean.
I got that. Thank you.
Cole had enough of a handle on the transmission now to begin to follow it, but it was heavily encrypted. He set to work breaking the codes.
What did you think of my work? As one scientist to another,
said Cole, mocking Bile's words. I found it disappointing, said Bile. He had a hard face, with nothing of kindness to it. I found little of interest, Cole. I have examined your work exhaustively. It is nothing revolutionary, merely variations on the same tired old theme. Muscle-swollen super soldiers, bigger, stronger, more annoyingly self-righteous. He gave a sneer and moved on to a crystal claw thrusting up from a plinth. The light of his projection glittered through the transparent material. Calling the Primaris Space Marines an improvement might be technically true, but you cannot truly improve upon a flawed design. Bile continued to pace around, his phantom passing through cabinets and display plinths.
I did what was required,
said Cole. He was irked at Bile's criticism. The Primaris Marines were a masterwork. Could he not see? He pushed the emotion aside. Why should he feel stung by the words of this monster? His wounded pride was disrupting the work of his subminds tracing the Lifercast. You probably did. That stiff old bastard Gilliman probably loved them. But you and I... Bile dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We are genitors of rare repute. We both know you could have done better.
Perhaps.
Come now. Bile stood up straight. It is a poor craftsman who only delivers what is expected of him. An artist aims to exceed. Always.
You understand, I only had 10,000 years.
Are you mocking me?
More myself,
said Cole.
I had to design a whole new suite of weaponry, armor, vehicles, and equipment to go with them. If we're going to be fair to me, which I think we should be, the Lord Primarch wanted an improvement upon the designs of his creator. That is what I gave him. I think Under the circumstances of my commission, that last request rather trumped any benefit to me showing off any supposed artistry I may or may not have. Don't you agree? I have seen the results of your art, Bile. You're not a scientist. You're a torturer.
Bile turned, glowing, doubled eyes upon the Archmagos, suddenly angry. You are naive. You believe I have turned to chaos? He shrugged, his temper just as suddenly gone, or at least hidden. I suppose that is understandable. It is also not true. These gods my old brothers talk endlessly of, they are a sickness, a discordant note that destroys the harmony of the music of the spheres. There are no gods, Archmagos. There is only time, and being, and thinking things that brew themselves up and out of the two.
That's a way to look at it,
said Cole. I am sure it would surprise you to learn that all I wish to do is what you wish to do.
Which would be?
Come now, said Bile, shaking his head. I want to save humanity.
A fine sentiment for the man in the manskin levers,
said Cole.
Most of the time when people want to save people, it's not to add them to their wardrobe. If I'm not mistaken, you have been associating with the traitors that threaten to plunge our entire reality into an endless hell for the last 10 millennia.
Cole stalked around Bile, rising up over him on his motive carriage.
You have bolstered their armies. You have aided their schemes. When you have not contented yourself with only abetting them, you have led them yourself in war against humanity. Your name is a byword for terror across hundreds of worlds. Wherever you go, your surgeon's knife is red with the blood of blameless folk. I have files of the things you have made from the living tissue of imperial citizens, slaughtered civilians, populations tortured into new, grotesque forms. I have this sickening feeling that you are pleading innocence with me. I am astounded.
Cole leaned in.
Yes, astounded. You are a monster.
Bile looked up with a condescending smile. I have been called monster before, and by people that would surprise you. Look at yourself. Do you think you would not give any child nightmares?
I am not pretty, but I'm nothing like you,
said Cole. No, you are not. You are not as good as I am. Bile began to pace again, gesturing with torment. I vivisected one of your creations. More than one, actually. But this one sticks in mind. He was ancient, almost as old as you or I. He was taken from a world far from Terra. He made a show of musing. Kidnapped. That is the word for what happened to him. Ripped from his family without his permission. Experimented on for millennia. Thousands of years of pain to be turned into a living weapon. Ha! You call me a monster. We are both monsters, the pair of us.
If I am a monster, then I am a monster on the right side of history,
said Cole. I say the same, Bile laughed loudly. There is no right side. There is no good and bad. Only two forces, equally bad as the other, locked in a death spiral. The Imperium is as rotten and degenerate as the followers of Abaddon are.
Then why do you help them rather than us? You could have used your talents for good.
What do you think I am trying to do? Bile scoffed. What do you think would have happened if I had come back to Terra after Fulgrim left? Would they have been there to welcome me with open arms, to hail my genius, my contribution to humanity? They would have shot me. If I had come back later, after Horus's failure, then they would have burned me alive instead. There's progress for you.
If I have my history correct, and please note, this is a rhetorical question, then I would say balderdash,
said Cole.
You spent hundreds of years leading the fallen children of the Emperor willingly.
And? You serve a moribund empire ruled by a corpse that feasts upon the souls of his subjects. There is no justice. There is no kindness. We are at the mercy of false gods on all sides. Bile moved on to another exhibit.
Oh, I can see where this is going,
said Cole.
This is the part where you tell me you wish to free us from all gods. By what? Replacing them with yourself?
I have been worshipped as a god, said Bile evenly. I found I have no taste for it.
I have heard this song before.
I have had enough in my life with those who speak in nothing but dramatic metaphor, snapped Bile. Songs, legends, no more. Will, Cole. It is will that will save us, not stories. He held up his hand and clenched it. My will. Your will. I know you want to stop all this, to drive chaos out, as do I.
Now the evil genius declaims his plan. You are a cliché in a horrifying coat.
Bile bared thin grey teeth. I have nothing to lose by telling you what I need, Cole, or what I wish to achieve. I have everything to gain. Humanity is weak and imperfect. As we exist now as a species, we are finished. Don't argue with me on this point. You machine priests spend your lives trying to mitigate the frailties of our kind. Many people, the Emperor included, have invested their time in creating superior strains of humanity. None of them had any success.
Until now.
Offered Cole.
There's a surprise.
I labored long to create a better race, one that would not fall to chaos, that would not prey endlessly upon its own. For centuries I attempted this, until, weary, I became tired of it. I, Fabius Bile, became bored.
Well,
said Cole.
You have my sympathy there.
I became bored because I made a fundamental mistake. I believed that I must control everything, that only I could save the galaxy. I became disillusioned, knowing that was impossible. I abandoned my children, cruelly. Some of what you say is right about me. By good fortune, it was the best thing I could have done. Since my reawakening, I have become aware of my new men again, and they have changed. He began to speak quickly, enthusiastically. You should see them, Cole. They are perfect. They are resistant to the law of the powers of the warp, physically mighty, invulnerable to age and disease. Their societies are egalitarian and just. All know their place and are satisfied to fulfill their role. I have seen what they have made of themselves, and I am humbled. I know now that the greatest creations must be like children, molded by their maker, but not finished. The greatest creations finish themselves. I have cloned every Primarch, Cole. They have all failed. If I were a more arrogant man, I would say that this is certainly the fault of the original material, and not my methods. But I must accept the possibility that I did not have all I needed to create a Primarch successfully. The error lay with me.
You still want to recreate the Emperor's sons?
Cole said. He wished to keep Bile talking. The algorithms employed by his subminds were steadily chewing through Bile's encryption. Deep in his core, he witnessed their unlocking as streams of numbers that turned green, and thereafter gave up their secrets. He was homing in on Bile's location, somewhere within the Avernus system, in the direction of the galactic core. He would not be far. Could not be. I did, Bile answered. It doesn't work. The first I made were mewling imbeciles, but I got better. I, like you, am still a believer in the ancient methods of discovery, and through observation and elimination, refined my experiments. It got to a point that the last few I made were perfect copies in every way. So perfect, they had all the flaws of their originals, including being attracted to the bright flame of damnation. I've come to believe the Emperor's creations are irredeemably touched by the warp, even your beloved Lord and Master.
Then you don't mean to repeat the exercise. You wish.
Cole thought a moment.
What do you wish?
He held up a finger.
Aha! That's it. You wish to change the direction of your researches. Not make your own Primarch, but make something better. A being of your own design, yet similar potential.
You have sight, said Bile with a small bow of his head. I am human. I am imperfect. The Emperor's mistakes rot my body still. As many times as I have cheated death, I will not live forever. My new men require leadership. If they are to take the human race into the future, they need help to survive. I wish to make a king worthy of them, something that avoids all the errors the Emperor committed.
That is an intriguing plan,
said Cole gravely. An impish feeling was rising in his gut, not helped by Bile's increasing earnestness. Despite the simplicity of what you have achieved with the Primaris Marines, I admire the elegance of your solutions. You are undoubtedly a genius, Cole, but you are a generalist. I am a specialist. I have knowledge and experience that you never will.
Possibly,
said Cole. Bile did not perceive the growing twinkle in Cole's eye. Definitely, said Bile. No one is limitless in ability. If you give me what I desire, you will have played your part in saving mankind. Think, Cole. The Necrons, the Tyranids, the Orcs. Chaos is not the only existential threat this galaxy faces. We are too weak as we are to survive. Do not let humanity perish at the hands of its myriad foes. Aid me. Let us put an end to these wars. All these space marines and temples to uncaring gods. These empires. Bile swept his hand dismissively through the air. These are the labors of lesser men. True scientists like you and I know the value of the great celestial machine, the variety of life and purpose to be found in the stars, even if you believe your god is behind it and I do not. Mankind can and should be the pinnacle of existence. Let us rise above it all. Help me bring peace. Give me the Sancprimus Portum, and you will be remembered as a benefactor of a new era. Your name will live forever, enshrined in memory, a great hero to our species. Cole looked at Bile, eyes round with surprise. Bile's hololith looked back at him expectantly. Well, what do you say? As one scientist to another, said Bile again, and he held out his hand. Let us cooperate.
Brothers, welcome to the feast. Tell me, which among you will be the first course?
The Horus Heresy would mark the damnation of humanity as 1,000 wars across 1,000 stars plunged the galaxy into ruin. Heretics, tyrants and psychotic murderers would be unleashed across the void in their endless rampage in service to the fell powers of the Warp. Yet among such despots, a select few would hearken millennia of suffering in their wake, as their bloody deeds corroded the very fabric of what it means to be human. For today, we shall elucidate the undying champion of the being known as She Who Thirsts, the scion of Chemos, Lucius the Eternal. The Emperor's children would, despite their legacy, burn among the brightest legions of the burgeoning Imperium. Drawn from the noble houses of Terra, conquered by the Master of Mankind, the sons of these proud bloodlines would comprise the ranks of the founding of the Legion of aristocratic warriors. Disciples of the virtues of perfection, poise, and nobility, the early years of the Third Legion would be characterized with the favor of the Master of Mankind as his heralds of his glorious future. Bedecked in gold and purple, the Astartes of the Emperor's children would endure many hardships prior to the reunion with their Primarch, Fulgrim, their legion coming close to total annihilation with the catastrophic loss of their gene seed to a viral outbreak, and would draw new recruits from the homeworld of their Primarch. Chemos, a barren mining world bereft of the grandeur of Holy Terra, would renew the Third Legion with aspirants hungry to prove their worth and exceed the deeds of their forebears. Among the dirt and grime of the dismal world, a youth of immense potential would be inducted into the Emperor's favored sons, Lucius. A handsome man, possessing immense talent in the art of swordcraft, Lucius would swiftly earn recognition within the command hierarchy of the Third Legion. Obsessed with the attainment of mastery of the blade above tactical acumen or command strategy, Lucius would hone his skill in duels with his brethren to earn glory. Prior to his induction within the Legion, Lucius would mark his sparring partners among the rabble of Chemos with scars during their practice duels and slay a number of Chemosian beggars to test his abilities. Decried for his disregard for both life and limb in the practice cages and beyond, Lucius's cruelty and egomaniacal tendencies would be tolerated by virtue of his skill at arms. Contemptuous of those unworthy to match his talent, Lucius would toy with his peers and grovel with his tutors in hopes of gleaning new lessons and mentorship. Despite his innumerable flaws, Lucius would spend every waking moment honing his understanding and mastery of swordsmanship. Competing for dominance during the tournament known as the Golden Blade upon Chemos, Lucius would defeat every one of his opponents before competing in the final battle for the title of champion. Facing an opponent twice his age, whom had earned championship twice over, Lucius's abilities would be tested to the limits. Uncontrovertibly the better duelist, Lucius would be winded by a dishonorable strike from his opponent's knee and seek retribution for his opponent's base attack. Dismembering the former champion limb from limb, Lucius would achieve victory at the cost of the outrage of the tournament onlookers. Storming the arena, further blood would be spilt as the crowd attempted to overwhelm Lucius. Yet a hulking, shadowy figure among the crowd would save the young boy. As sergeant of the 3rd Legion, the Astartes would observe Lucius's battle prowess and deem him worthy of recruitment within the Emperor's Children Legion. An opportunity that Lucius would accept with gleeful pride. Imbued with might befitting an Astartes, Lucius would survive the many surgeries and trials to ascend to the stature of a Space Marine. Training daily through honor duels decreed by the Legion sergeants, Lucius would revel in his besting of his battle brothers and dominance of the practice cages' blade machines. Achieving a string of flawless victories within the cages prior to the Feast of the Emperor's Blessing, Lucius would earn glory within his legion as the only legionary to achieve such a feat in its history. A paragon of the Legion's uncompromising zeal for perfection, Lucius's deeds would be recognized by the 3rd Legion's Lord Commander, Eidolon. Installed as the captain of the 13th Company, Lucius would sate his unquenchable thirst for battle in service to the companies of the 3rd Legion. His arrogance, now exacerbated with his promotion as the 13th captain of the Legion, few senior officers outranked his stature. Ever feeding his ego with glories made by the edge of his sword, Lucius would persecute the Great Crusade not for the betterment of mankind, but for the elevation of his own legend. His skin unblemished by a single scar, no opponent's blade had ever claimed a mark on his skin, yet such a claim would soon be tarnished. Garviel Loken, 10th captain of the Sons of Horus Legion, would spar with Lucius and break his septum with a strike of his fist an instant after the commencement of their duel. Ritually scarring his chest as the only mortal being capable of injuring himself with a blade, Lucius's morbid obsession with self-mutilation would exceed new heights of depravity. Shaving his scalp and making deep cuts into his face, Lucius would refute the teasing of his legion for his handsome features, unbefitting a warrior of the Legiones Astartes. Equating pain with eminence, Lucius's masochistic tapestry of wounds would prove to be an ill portent of his future. For the dawn of the Horus heresy loomed, and Lucius would soon decide the allegiance best suited to his own selfish goals. Few of friends, Lucius would, despite his glaring deficiencies in personality, attempt to befriend disparate elements of the Emperor's Children's expeditionary fleet. Forming a fractious brotherhood with the commander of the 3rd Legion's 10th Company, Saul Tarvitz, the level-headed captain would identify Lucius's flaws in hopes that the young upstart would overcome his failings. Befriending the duplicitous remembrancer, Serena de Angelus, the Slaanesh-corrupted mortal would reveal her own scarred forearms, signifying the death of her peers, such as Leopold Cadmus, whose blood she now used to illustrate her paintings. Lucius was no longer perfect in visage, and with encouragement from his degenerate peers, would horrifically scar his face after its disfigurement by Garviel Loken. Marking his flesh with a notch for each worthy opponent joined in battle, Lucius's skin would be the canvas for his debased tally of foes. With the betrayal of the Emperor's children upon the surface of Istvan free, Lucius would join the loyalist 3rd Legionaries in their defiance against the War Master's forces. Yet in secret, Lucius would confer with Lord Commander Eidolon in orchestrating the destruction of the loyalist offences from within. Turning on his loyal battle brothers, Lucius would butcher his allies and confront his once friend, Saul Tarvitz. Fueled by jealousy, Lucius had come to resent Tarvitz's command of the loyalist survivors during the 3-month defense of the Coral City. Unable to best his battle brother in the ensuing duel, Lucius would flee the battle in disgrace. Tarvitz would presumably die upon the surface of Istvan III, forever denying Lucius the chance to best his former brother in battle. Reinstalled among the traitor contingent of the 3rd Legion, Lucius would seek self-inflicted penance for his inability to slay Saul Tarvitz. Participating in the Dropside Massacre of Istvan V against the Loyalist counterattack of the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, Lucius would join Lord Commander Eidolon in leading the vanguard into the heart of the Loyalist forces. Dancing through enemy lines with phenomenal skill in swordsmanship, Lucius would carve a bloody path through the ambushed Astartes of the Loyalists. Earning glory for his legion with their overwhelming victory against the Loyalists, Lucius would return to his legion to find his Primarch changed. Fulgrim had slain his brother Ferrus Manus upon the Urgal depression of Istvan V, yet found the taste of victory over the Gorgon to be bitter. The Phoenician had gifted Lucius the demonic sword, the Leia Blade, for his deeds at Istvan. Yet his erratic behavior was not in keeping with his regardless, changed demeanor. Disobeying the orders of the War Master, Fulgrim would order his legion to assault the Mechanicum mining world of Prismatica V. Lord Commander Eidolon would question his Primarch's orders, and for his provocation, be beheaded by the Phoenician. Pouring the blood from his severed head into goblets of wine, Fulgrim would order his inner circle of senior officers to drink the crimson concoction as a sign of loyalty to his will, to which the deviant Emperor's children would agree. Seeking answers for his liege's change in personality, Lucius would investigate La Fenice, the Grand Theatre aboard the 3rd Legion's flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. Above the central stage of the theatre, Lucius would observe a golden frame painting with Fulgrim imposed before the Heliopolis gates of the flagship. Seeing horror within the eyes of the illustration of his glorious Genefather of such illustrative skill that no mortal could capture such an otherworldly depiction. Convening the Brotherhood of the Phoenix, including Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile and First Captain Julius Caesaron, the sons of the Phoenician would confront the impostor wearing their Primarch's skin. Subduing him at great cost, the Brotherhood of the Phoenix would bring Fulgrim's body to the Apothecarian and conduct the exorcism of their Genesire. Misinterpreting their Primarch's condition, Fulgrim would reassume control of his body and reveal his deception against the demon of the Leia Blade. Using his captivity to learn and understand the workings of the ruinous powers, the Phoenician would return to his Genesons with bountiful knowledge of the beings of the warp. Knowledge which would further damn the 3rd Legion. With the demon of the Leia Blade now trapped within the portrait of La Fenice, Fulgrim would command the Emperor's children to join forces with the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, in their venture to the world of Idris. Seeking the Angel Exterminatus within the deepest depths of the Eye of Terror, the Eldari Croneworld of Idris housed a power beyond mortal comprehension. The origin of the birth of the being known as Slaanesh, Fulgrim would claim its remnant power of the Sepulchre of Isha's Doom within the citadel of Ama-Nisha Kalis. Seizing such power, Fulgrim would achieve apotheosis to become a demon prince of Slaanesh, yet a planetary defense force within reach of the Eye of Terror would stand in the path of the 3rd and 4th Legion in their venture to the Croneworld. Hydra Caudatis would attempt to stall the traitors from their prize, yet be no match for the Astartes of 2 legions. Yet with the intervention of the Shattered Legion warband of the Sisypheum, the Loyalists would attempt to cripple their advance. Lucius would lead his men in fighting the Black Shield warband, yet be confronted by the Raven Guard survivor of the Dropside Massacre, Nikona Sharokin. Dueling in single combat, Lucius would initially be invigorated to find an opponent worthy of slaying. Yet with each subsequent clash of their blades, Lucius would realize his error. Sharrokin was more than a match for Lucius and would bury one of his blades deep within his side. Missing each and every attempt to counter his foe, Lucius would be slain by the son of Corvus Corax. Finding no pleasure nor pride in his deed, Sharrokin would drive his blades deep within Lucius's hearts and lungs, severing arteries and irrevocably damaging his organs. Death would claim Lucius, yet through the machinations of She Who Firsts and the Spider of the Third Legion, Lucius would not relent to the whims of oblivion. Reborn through unknown means, Lucius would awaken upon the Medicae slab of Fabius Bile. The traitors of the Horus Heresy had failed in their rebellion against the Imperium, yet Lucius cared not for the ambitions of those beyond his own gain. Transforming into a terrible creature driven only by the pleasures of mutilation and thrill of combat, Lucius would ascend to become the chosen herald of Slaanesh. Indulging in orgies of slaughter, the champion of She Who Firsts would not relent in his pursuit of perfection and mastery of swordsmanship. Transcending death itself in pursuit of his obsession, Lucius would compete in the contest known as the Scarlet Blade and face Lord Commander Sirius of the Emperor's Children in battle. Wounding Lucius with his ornate power spear several times over, Lucius would delight in his pain at the hands of his foe. Seemingly bested, Lucius would be bludgeoned to death by the martial prowess of Sirius until nothing remained but a bloody pulp upon the sands of the dueling arena. Yet as weeks waxed and waned, Sirius would undergo a hideous transformation. His ornate power armor now bore depictions of cackling demons, his hair had fallen from its root, and his eyes now glowed with a purple hue. Scar tissue formed on his skin, much to the delight of his despicable legion. His screams became laughter, until Lucius's form grew from the Lord Commander's mutated form. Fulgrim would smile to see his favored son reborn and install him as the rightful Lord Commander of the Legion in Sirius's place. Bearing a curse upon his foes, any who slay Lucius the Eternal shall become host to his rebirth. Yet it is said, should any foe who slays him take no satisfaction in the kill, Lucius shall be denied his rejuvenation and be condemned to sleep forevermore. But until such a stalwart foe shall succeed in the deed, Lucius's foes shall adorn his armor of shrieking souls as their twisted forms languish in never-ending agony. Unleashed upon the galaxy at the head of his own warband for 10 millennia, Lucius has wreaked untold misery and torment across the stars. Armed with the Lash of Torment and Leia Blade, Lucius seeks foes worthy of his prowess in battle, in his quest to become the greatest duelist in existence. Slain by many foes, Lucius regardless rejects the embrace of death time and again. An affront to both creation and his Imperium, the innocents of the galaxy plead for salvation against the relentless monster born of pride, ambition, and vanity. All beings experience hunger, that persistent reminder of mortality, that blooming hollow inside all, which affirms that only by taking from without and devouring within can we extend our coil. Hunger is universal for those who are destined to die. As they feed, they pay the incremental bribes that forestall its coming.
Our names may be forgotten, and our bones crumble to dust, but our deaths will echo through the millennia to come. Horus Lupercal's betrayal of the Imperium would change the course of history forever. Countless lives would be lost, planets destroyed and heroes murdered. For who could stand in the path of the plans of a tyrant demigod? Whom would be courageous enough to face the darkness alone, forsaking kin and the bonds of battle-forged brotherhood for the greater good of all existence? Whom would be the first to stand defiant against the fiercest foe humanity has ever faced? The answer comes not from a Primarch, nor a Sigillite, nor even the Emperor of mankind himself. Instead, it would be the heroic actions of a line officer, 10th Company Captain of the Emperor's Children, Saul Tarvitz. Tarvitz was unlike his brethren in many ways. Although like all Astartes of the 3rd Legion he sought perfection, Tarvitz would strive for purity of purpose above glory and self-aggrandizement, rejecting the notion of superiority over men, instead encapsulating the example of duty to the Emperor, beloved by all, and tragically, the glorification of his Primarch, Fulgrim. Saul was seen by his commanding officers such as Lord Commander Eidolon as a dull man with no ambition, yet his men of the 10th Company would deeply respect his leadership, a trait which his greatest comrade within the Legion, Lucius, captain of the 13th Company, would increasingly despise, his jealousy towards Tarvitz gaining momentum during the battle with the Megarachnids on the planet colloquially known as Murder. During the 203rd year of the Great Crusade, the Emperor's Children would investigate a distress beacon left by the 9th Legiones Astartes, the Blood Angels. Unable to decipher the warning beacons surrounding the planet left by the human Interrex species, the Astartes led by Captain Kaitus From had made planetfall on a planet infested with large arachnoid creatures, capable of piercing ceramite armor with their sharp claws and able to withstand even bolter rounds with their thick hides. Fierce storms blanketed the planet's surface, scattering the Blood Angels, their crafts unable to facilitate extraction or reinforcement. The Emperor's Children forces led by Eidolon would search the environment, suffering heavy casualties due to the scattering of their own forces, mirroring the actions of their cousin legions past era. The landing party led by Saul Tarvitz would discover the sons of Sanguinius's bodies impaled on tree-like structures formed by the Megarachnids. These trees were the source of the storms causing disarray for the Astartes landing craft. Tarvitz, Lucius and the men of their respective companies would destroy the structures, allowing for the skies to clear and after many bloody skirmishes facilitate the reinforcement forces of the Lunar Wolves. Here Tarvitz would form a bond of friendship with Lunar Wolves' 2nd Company Captain Tarik Torgadan, much to Lucius's displeasure. With the combined forces of Emperor's Children, Lunar Wolves, Legio Mortis Titans, Imperial Army forces, and even Sanguinius and a detachment of his Blood Angels, the planet known as Murder would be cleansed of the filthy Megarachnid species. This led Saul to strengthen his bond of brotherhood with several members of the 16th Legion, seeing his values and disposition more closely aligned with these Lunar Wolves, in contrast to his own kin. The Emperor's Children would later campaign to regain the compliance of the Istvan system, now in open rebellion to the Imperium of Man. Warmaster Horus Lupercal would dispatch 4 legions, his now renamed Sons of Horus, Mortarian's Death Guard, Angron's World Eaters, and Fulgrim's Emperor's Children, joining forces to quell the rebellion being spearheaded on the planet of Istvan III. The initial wave of rebels led by the demonic war singers of Chaos would face the wrath of the Death Guard and Emperor's Children in cooperative slaughter. In the ensuing battle, Eidolon's forces would cut a path to the Warsinger, currently engaged in battle with the Death Guard's 7th Company and its battle captain, Nathaniel Garrow. Garrow would be injured during the fray, with Lord Commander Eidolon and Saul Tarvitz driving the demonic creature back, saving Garrow's life. Tarvitz alone would witness Eidolon destroy the Warsinger using an unholy scream of sonic energy. Shocked at his commander's new ability, Tarvitz would eventually discover it to be an augmentation implanted by the Emperor's Children Chief Apothecary, Fabius Bile, during his heretical experiments on the Legion's men. With the battle over, Tarvitz would assess the damage received to his honor brother Nathaniel Garrow. Relieved that the injury would not be fatal, the two would engrave their vambraces with the Imperial Aquila, a sign of battle debt forged by brotherhood. With Tarvitz's suspicions raised by the actions of his Lord Commander and Chief Apothecary, Saul would make the decision to stay on board Eidolon's flagship, the Andronius, to serve as its senior staff officer. Tarvitz knew that the spear tip for the next wave of battle was imminent, but found it strange that the glory-hungry Eidolon would not be present in the vanguard. Coupled with what he had seen during the battle against the Warsinger, Tarvitz would request his legion's venerable dreadnought Ancient Rylanor to exchange places. Rylanor would honour his brother's request and ventured in Tarvitz's place to the battle taking place on the surface of Istvan Free. On the Andronius, Tarvitz would discover the source of his unease: Life-Eater virus bombs readying to be deployed onto the planet's surface. The result clearly intended to consume and destroy every dutiful Astartes currently fighting on Istvan Free. With all due haste, Tarvitz seized the Thunderhawk gunship from the ship's hangar and attempted to flee the Andronius, with all speed charging towards Istvan Free's surface before the bombs would fall. Eidolon would be informed of Tarvitz's interference, dispatching Raven interceptors to destroy the stolen Thunderhawk. En route to the planet's surface, Tarvitz would send a distress signal to a nearby ship stationed above, the Eisenstein. The ship currently harbouring the injured battle captain of the 14th Legion, Nathaniel Garrow. Requesting aid from his honor brother, Tarvitz would inform the Eisenstein's crew that all loyal servants of the Emperor were being betrayed. Honouring their bond of loyalty and friendship, Garrow would decide on his next actions. He would mask his honor brother's escape and with the guns of the Eisenstein destroy the lead Raven interceptor. For soon Garrow would now also be embroiled in the deceptions of his own legion. His duty to preserve the Imperium, now of paramount import. Tarvitz would successfully land on the planet's surface, joining the forces of Captain Erland's World Eater forces. Warning them of the impending virus bombing, Tarvitz would lead a contingent of the Sons of Angron to safety, though most of the 12th Legion would never reach the safety of the shelters in time. With the planetary bombardment over, the traitor Primarchs would become enraged with the discovery of the survival of the betrayed loyalist Astartes. Their plans to destroy all dissenters in one single move ruined. Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, travelled to the planet's surface, laying waste to his own sons who dared resist his will. Captain Erland would sacrifice himself to allow Tarvitz to escape.
"This isn't your fight," Erland yelled over the gunfire. "Get out of here."
"Emperor's children never run," replied Tarvitz, drawing his sword.
"They do from this."
It had been said that a space marine knew no fear. Such a statement was not literally true. A space marine could know fear, but he had the training and discipline to deal with it and not let it affect him in battle. Captain Saul Tarvitz was no exception. He had faced storms of gunfire and monstrous aliens, and even glimpsed the insane predators of the war. But when Angron charged, he ran. Captain Saul Tarvitz's fate would never be confirmed. However, it is presumed that no legionary could survive the slaughter that ensued in the following months. Tarvitz would lead the doomed loyalist Astartes of all the assembled legions alongside his brothers of the Lunar Wolves Legion, Garviel Loken and Tarik Torgadon. Their guerrilla warfare would stall the traitor legions for a time, until Saul's brother-in-arms, Lucius, would betray him, siding with Eidolon and breaking the formation of the Loyalists from within. But for all this, Saul Tarvitz and the brave men of the resistance of Istvan Free would buy the Imperium precious time to prepare. His honor brother Garrow now relaying his warning to the Sigillite.
Eidolon served the Emperor's children during the Great Crusade, Horus Heresy, and Era Indomitus. A Terran by birth, Eidolon would be among the most senior ranks of the 3rd Legion, and bear the title of Lord Commander.
Due to the Legion's ravaged numbers during the loss of their gene stocks during the early days of the Great Crusade, the 3rd Legion would spend its initial years as a supplementary force under the supervision of the Lunar Wolves. With their recruits restoring the Legion's numbers, Eidolon would assist his Primarch, Fulgrim, in forming the ranks and command structure of the Legion. As the right hand of his Primarch, Eidolon would assist Fulgrim throughout the Great Crusade as a venerated yet pompous warrior. During the Legion's battles against the species of the planet of Leia, the corruption of the Emperor's children would begin. Their collective ego, bolstered by the influence of the Temple of the Lair and the discovery of the blade within, Eidolon would be among the first to experiment with the bounty of riches the planet revealed. The Legion's chief apothecary, Fabius Bile, would discover the Lairan species had made extensive genetic alterations to their bodies. Eidolon, in his pursuit of power, would be among the first to be experimented on by Fabius aboard the void ship Andronius, allowing his own men to be experimented on until Eidolon would deem Fabius's experiments to be safe for himself to undergo. The Lord Commander would begin his heretical surgeries. Following his recovery from the Spider's knives, Eidolon would persecute the megarachnid species of the planet designated 1-4020, of which the so-called World of Murder had already claimed the lives of many Blood Angels Astartes. Alongside the Lunar Wolves, the Emperor's children, under the command of Eidolon, would lend their blades and bolters to the conflict. His methods of waging war and dubious commands, undermined by the Lunar Wolf captain, Tarik Torgadon, Eidolon's shame would further drive him to attain perfection. Hastening further augmentations to his body, Eidolon's trachea would be modified to increase the strength of his vocal cords. Utilizing such power during the compliance of the Istvan system alongside the 14th Legion, the Death Guard. His shrieks, capable of paralyzing and destroying the heretical Warsinger during battle. Further descending into madness following the betrayal of the War Master and his own traitor Primarch, Eidolon would aid in the purging of the loyalist elements of his legion. Commanding his men during the Dropside Massacre of Istvan V, Eidolon would prove to be a fervent, if not capable commander to his Primarch. Following Fulgrim's campaign to conquer the Forge World of Prismatica V, Eidolon would nonetheless overstep his Primarch's ever more fragile boundaries. Questioning Fulgrim's orders, the now angered Primarch would in a paranoid stupor behead the Lord Commander. His blood mixed with wine would be shared by the senior commanders of the Emperor's children, yet Eidolon would not remain dead for long. Ordering Chief Apothecary Fabius to restore the Lord Commander, Fulgrim would allow his right hand a chance at redemption. Sewing the grisly head back onto his body, Bile would reconnect the nerve clusters of Eidolon's neck and be imbued with the perverse favor of the Prince of Pleasure. Reborn, yet racked with unending pain, Eidolon would be driven mad with depraved joy. Referred to as the Risen, his unpleasantly scarred and horrific visage would serve as a reminder to the Emperor's children to never criticize their Primarch. Eidolon would remain a commander of the Legion and persecute the Loyalist forces during the Siege of Terra. Assaulting the Saturnine Gate alongside Abaddon the Despoiler, Eidolon would face the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists. Dueling the Emperor's champion, Sigismund, Eidolon would be bested in combat and thrown from the battlements, plummeting 1,000 meters into the depths below. Yet despite his seeming death, the soul severed of the 3rd Legion still stalks the Imperium during the Era Indomitus. Styling himself as the Lord Commander Primus, Eidolon would attempt to reunify the Emperor's children. Allying once more with the now War Master of Chaos, Abaddon, Eidolon has been responsible for the sundering of hundreds of Imperial worlds. A champion of the Keeper of Secrets, Nakari, his Holy Inquisition has attempted to end the deeds of the Revenant Astartes, to no avail. His flagrant defiance an insult to not only the Imperium, but the sanctity of existence itself. Ancient Rylanor served as the Ancient of Rites within the Emperor's Children Legion of Adeptus Astartes during the Horus Heresy. In his youth, Rylanor would be born on Terra and serve during the Wars of Unification. Fighting beside the Emperor of Mankind himself, Rylanor would go on to be the first to carry his Primarch's banner into battle in the Legion's history. Yet Rylanor would be wounded in battle against the Eldar during the Great Crusade. Interned within a Contemptor-class dreadnought, he would oversee the progression of the 3rd Legion's recruits. From the ranks of novices to Fulgrim's Chosen, Rylanor would have a keen eye for being able to perceive lies amongst his kin. Serving as one of the inner circle of the Emperor's children, he would be troubled by his Legion's change in behavior in the aftermath of the assault on the Xenos world of Laren. Beseeched by Saul Tarvitz, captain of the 10th Company, to fight in his stead on the battlefield of Istvan Free, Rylanor would be dispatched amongst the loyalist contingent of the 3rd Legion. Braving the fierce betrayal of Horus Lupercal and his insurrection against the Imperium, Rylanor's fury would become a symbol of the 3rd Legion's glory, righteousness, perfection, and loyalty to the Emperor. As battle waged, Tarvitz would command Rylanor to defend an underground hangar at the Prefector's palace. Buried inside the hangar, Rylanor would stand vigil as Istvan Free's final survivor. For 10,000 years, he would lay dormant, and as the 41st millennium dawned, a trio of heretic Astartes of the Thousand Suns Legion would venture to Istvan Free. Dispatched by their Primarch Magnus the Red, the traitors would investigate a distress signal emanating from the long-dead world. The message of the distress call reading, "The Ancient awaits." The sons of the 15th Legion would discover a badly damaged dreadnought. Awakening the slumbering giant, Rylanor would exclaim that they were not the quarry he sought. Repurposing a sonic device of the traitor Emperor's children previously sent to kill him, Rylanor would attempt to lure his Primarch, Fulgrim, to face him. A lure which had succeeded. Fulgrim appeared before Rylanor, and the Ancient of Rites voiced his disgust for what his Primarch had become. Revealing his long-guarded charge, an undetonated virus bomb, Rylanor would arm the device. Fulgrim attacked Rylanor, further wounding him but offering him a chance to rejoin his legion. Rylanor would reject his Genefather's offer, exclaiming,
"I am Rylanor of the Emperor's Children, Ancient of Rites, Venerable of the Palatine Host, and proud servant of the Emperor of Mankind, beloved by all. I reject you now and always."
The warhead detonated, cleansing Istvan Free once more of life. Though Fulgrim would not die, the Phoenician soul would be further fragmented. Rylanor's defiance, an undeniable victory against Fulgrim's ego. Lord Commander Vespasian served the Emperor's Children Legion during the Great Crusade. Among the 11 Lord Commanders of the 3rd Legion, Vespasian would symbolize the nobility of the Emperor's children prior to their ruinous fall. Fighting alongside his Primarch, Fulgrim, during the cleansing of the Laren, Vespasian would begin to observe the signs of chaos seeping into the ranks of his proud legion. For solar months, Vespasian would consult with his respected peers within the legion, such as Captain of the 2nd Company, Solomon Demeter, regarding his concerns for the future of the Emperor's children. Present during the 3rd Legion's meeting with the Eldar craft world of Ulfwë, upon the maiden world of Tarsus, Farseer Eldrad Ulfrain would present a dire warning to the Phoenician of the impending betrayal of the War Master of the Imperium, Horus Lupercal. Refusing to believe the assertions of the Eldar, with the manipulations of the recently claimed Blade of the Lair upon his person, Fulgrim would order his delegation to slaughter the Xenos. Reluctantly carrying out the will of his Primarch, Vespasian would command his men to kill the Eldar and order exterminatus upon Tarsus. Fulgrim would contact the Lupercal following the warning of the Farseer, yet not allow Vespasian to be present during his delegation. Distanced from his Primarch and ever alienated by the behavior of his kin, Vespasian would refuse for himself or his men to undergo the surgeries of the Legion's chief apothecary, Fabius Bile.
Condemned as loyal to the Emperor in the eyes of Fulgrim, the Phoenician would plot to purge the loyalist elements within his legion as the snare of chaos manipulation tightened. Following the Battle of Calanades, after many rejected audiences with his Primarch, Vespasian would confront Fulgrim within the stateroom of the 3rd Legion's flagship, Pride of the Emperor. The demon within the Lair Blade would demand blood, and with its malevolent whispers, Fulgrim would murder Vespasian with his recent gift from the War Master, the Kinnebrak Anaphame. Dying at the hands of his Genesire, it is small mercy that Vespasian would not witness the depravity awaiting his legion. For upon the fields of Istvan Free, Vespasian would be absent from the butchery, slaughter, and corruption of his once noble kin.
Julius Caesaron served as first captain of the Emperor's Children during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A formidable and respected warrior during the Great Crusade, Caesaron would show great fondness for poetry, music, and the disciplines of the arts. Accompanying his Primarch, Fulgrim, during their cleansing of Lairan, Julius would battle the Lair species within their capital city as they protected their accursed shrine of Slaanesh. Upon entering the temple, Caesaron would be enraptured and enthralled by the waves of lurid and degenerate sights, sounds, and stimuli. Now enticed with the lure of chaos, Caesaron, upon returning to the Emperor's Children fleet, would attempt to recreate his observances of the temple. Aiding in his legion's corruption to the pleasures of the senses, Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile would conduct surgeries on the Astartes using methods gleaned from the Lairan species. Caesaron would undergo such surgeries, allowing the corruption of his mind to spread to his body. Prior to the betrayal of Istvan Free, Primarch Fulgrim would confront his most beloved brother, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands Legion, with the poisoned chalice of treachery. Accompanying the Phoenician alongside the Phoenix Guard, Caesaron would command his men to slay the Iron Hands Morlocks and grievously wound their first captain, Gabriel Santor. Escaping to the Istvan system with their backstabbing complete, Caesaron alongside his legion would further devolve into madness within the La Fenice auditorium of the vessel, Pride of the Emperor. With the corrupted performance created by the composer, Bekwa Kinska, the debauchery of the performance would resemble the experiences first seen within the Temple of the Lair. With mutations and possessions running rampant within the auditorium, Caesaron would be drawn to the musical abominations and slowly transform into one of the first accursed Noise Marines. Leading his newly forged Cacophony during the Istvan V Dropside Massacre, Julius would, despite his command, busy himself not with leading his men, but defiling the corpses of the fallen loyalists. Adorning his armor with scraps of their flesh and armor, Caesaron would be stopped with the confrontation of his nemesis, Gabriel Santor. Fully corrupted by chaos, Santor would look in horror at the creature that Julius had become. With a feral scream, Caesaron would charge at Santor. The two would duel in a ferocious battle, with the result causing both combatants to be agonizingly wounded. Yet for Julius, he would delight in such pain, with him thanking Santor for such exquisite agony. As both first captains succumbed to their wounds, Caesaron would nonetheless be chosen by his patron god, Slaanesh, to rise once more. Ascending to transform into a demon prince of She Who Firsts, Caesaron would be reborn during 812.M41 on the hive world of Shardanus. During the purge of the contiguous subsector, Caesaron would face the Iron Hands once more on the planet of Shardanus. Clan Rolkin's Lord Commander, Arvin Ralph, would lead his librarians to face the Demon Prince in their attempt to prevent the planet from becoming a demon world. Successful in their toil, the Iron Hands would defeat Caesaron and banish his soul back to the roiling tides of the warp. His mortal form destroyed until his accursed being shall once again taint the mortal
realm.
Solomon Demeter served as a captain of the Emperor's Children during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. As commander of the Emperor's Children Second Company, Demeter's reckless nature and exacting standards stood out even within such a perfectionist creed. A noble example for all his men to follow, Solomon's dedication and loyalty to the Emperor would prove to be his downfall. An expert swordsman and brilliant tactician, Demeter waded into battle, often eschewing the use of his helmet to better feel the sensations of combat. Treating his weapons and armor with a master artificer's care bordering on the obsessive, Demeter adjusted his armaments to improve their reliability and rate of fire. Present during the Emperor's Children's 28th Expeditionary Fleet's persecution of the Laren Xenos, Demeter led his men during the battle on Atoll 19. Accepting that sufficient military prowess was always superior to unattainable perfection, his methods used successfully in persecuting the Leia, though derided by his peers, were crucial in achieving victory. His men's skill exceeding the pedigree of all comparable legions during the campaign, Solomon's forces earned the praise of his Primarch as they pacified the underwater cities of the Xenos. The Phoenician entered the epicenter of their enemy's strength, the Temple of the Leia, and claimed the strange demon blade enshrined within. Spared the influence of the Taint of Chaos by virtue of his absence from entering the temple, following their successful campaign, Demeter witnessed the decline of his legion's sanity. Aiding the Iron Hand's 52nd Expeditionary Fleet during their conflict against the Diasporix alliance of humans and Xenos, Solomon witnessed the lapse of judgment of his Primarch, which required the Gorgon's intervention. The 3rd Legion's Voidcraft, Firebird, had incurred damage from the Diasporix, requiring intervention of the 10th Legion's flagship, Fist of Iron, to prevent further catastrophe. His pride wounded, Fulgrim led a shipboarding action against their enemy's own flagship, while Solomon's own men lay siege to the Xenos' command center. Capturing the flagship's bridge, Demeter's successful actions further antagonized his Primarch by robbing him of his vengeance. Fighting by the side of Fulgrim upon the maiden world of Tarsus, Demeter witnessed the outrage of his Primarch during his meeting with the Eldar Farseer, Eldrad Ulfran. Slaying the Wraithlord, Kiraean Goldhelm, and an avatar of Cain, the Emperor's Children forced the Xenos to flee, knowing that their attempt to prevent their corruption from chaos had been made too late. Ordering his fleet to virus bomb several maiden worlds as reprisal, Fulgrim's actions further estranged him from the honorable Captain Demeter. Commanding his legion to cleanse the Kalanides system of the Orc Xenos, the men of the Second Company received no aid from their Primarch, nor the 1st or 3rd Companies during their campaign. Saved from total annihilation by the actions of the 10th and 13th Companies, led by Captains Sol Tarvitz and Lucius, such a callous deployment stirred the Lord Commander Vespasian to confront their Primarch. Murdered by the Phoenician, Vespasian would be the first of the loyal Astartes of the Legion to fall, yet the Great Purge of the Third was close to fruition. Upon Istvan free, the loyalists of the Emperor's Children were deployed, for this would be the last battle the Second Company would fight under the leadership of their stalwart commander. Warned of the impending orbital bombardment by Sol Tarvitz, the loyalist Astartes of the 3rd, 12th, 14th and 16th Legions sought shelter. Surviving the virus bombing of the planet, Demeter regardless did not evade the subsequent firebombing of its surface and incurred a grievous wound requiring treatment by Apothecary Vodon. Fighting alongside Tarvitz, the captain of the 10th promised vengeance against their duplicitous brethren, and so it was that the remaining heroic paragons of their legion took to the field side by side. Alike to a phoenix, Solomon refused to perish and renewed of purpose displayed the courage and martial skill to which he was revered, refusing to take command of the loyalist survivors and entrusting Tarvitz with their leadership. Fighting until the bitter end, Demeter's life would be ended by the treachery of Captain Lucius, his actions causing Solomon to kill loyalist Astartes unknowingly. Dying by Lucius's hand, Solomon Demeter's last moments were those of bleak contemplation as he surmised the conclusion of the Great Civil War, the light of his eyes fading in the shadow of the Precentor's palace. Telemachon Lyrus serves as a member of the Black Legion during the era Indomitus. A Terran-born master swordsman, once entrusted with the command of the Emperor's Children's 51st Company. During the Horus Heresy, the then Telemachon Lyrel fought as a member of the honor guard of Lord Commander Eidolon. Enthralled by the influence of She Who Firsts, Slaanesh, alike to his kinsmen of the 3rd Legion, Lyrel succumbed to the pursuits of hedonistic pleasure and served as second in command of the traitor warband leader, Cadalus Orlantia. Presiding over many members of his former Legion's 16th, 40th, and 51st Companies, with time, this duplicitous captain grew tired of fighting by the side of his men. Commanding his warship, the Threat of Rapture, to aid in the battle against the wayward Astartes, Falcus Kyber, Leovine Ukris, and Iskandar Kion, Lyrus incurred a grievous wound. Captured by the renegades, Telemachon's wounds were treated aboard the Thousand Suns vessel Talalok by the hands of the likewise captive Drukhari, Nefertari. Falling in love with the Xenos, Telemachon reveled in the torture inflicted by her hands, which only strengthened his infatuation with the Dark Eldar. Defecting to the cause of the renegades, Lyrus joined the Battle of Harmony waged against his former legion as their leader, Ezekiel Abaddon, sought to confront the Spider, Fabius Bile. Slaying the clone of the resurrected Primarch, Horus Lupercal, Telemachon witnessed the ascension of the new War Master of Chaos, and was inducted as the 4th of his new liege's most trusted heralds, the Ezekarion. Rewarded for his loyalty with a shard of the blade Moonsilver, once wielded by the felled Blood Angel's Primarch, Sanguinius, Lyrus reforged its metal into a death mask, mimicking his once unscarred visage. Promoted to lead his own Chaos Warband as the Lord of the Shrieking Masquerade, comprised of Chaos Raptors, despite Telemachon's temperament causing Iskandar Kion to bristle, the new War Master of Chaos nevertheless valued his skill in battle. Recorded to be active during Abaddon the Despoiler's 7th Black Crusade, the Lord of the Shrieking Masquerade brought low the Blood Angels chapter during the Battle of Makan, and came close to extinguishing their legacy. Continuing his spiral into depravity and excess, Telemachon Lyrus fights to this day, as his limerence for Nefertari, now severed with her death, fuels his twisted endearment with vengeance.
Marius Voirosian served as the captain of the 3rd Company of the Emperor's Children Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. A dull, serious, and emotionless warrior during his prime, Voirosian showed disdain for small talk, jokes, or nonsense. Like all his legion, he would seek to achieve perfection, and demanded the same unyielding drive to achieve greatness from his warriors. Feeling physically sick when underachieving any of his goals, he would be fastidious in his preparations for battle. Often critiqued by his brethren, as akin to a follower of the mantras and doctrines of the Ultramarines. A member of the warrior lodge, the Brotherhood of the Phoenix, Marius also bore guest membership of the Lunar Wolves Lodge. Failing to engage his company during the Battle of the Cleansing of Laren, Marius would resolve to prove himself and his company as worthy of their pedigree. Utilizing the concoctions and experimental chemicals created by the 3rd Legion's apothecary, Fabius Bile, without question, eventually leading him to undergo experimental surgery in his quest to better himself and please his Primarch. Fabius would rewire the pleasure centers of Marius's brain, transforming him into a being continually at the brink of experiencing overwhelming emotions, sensations, and stimulations, culminating in his attendance at the decadent Maraviglia orchestral performance by the Remembrancer Bekwa Kinska, the power of the foul music of Slaanesh summoning demonic presences and infusing her instruments with fell powers. The orgy of deviancy would birth a new corrupted Astartes, the Noise Marines, with Marius the first commander amongst its decrepit foil, the Cacophony. his armor adorned with the skin of the dead of the Maraviglia, his ears removed, eyes sewn open, and mouth unnaturally gaping wide. Waging war on the fields of the Istvan V Dropside Massacre, the Battle of the Sepulchre of Isha's Doom, and the assault on the Iron Hand strike cruiser, the Sisypheum. Besting Iron Father Sabik Wayland and the dreadnought Karashi Bombastus aboard the Sisypheum, Marius would face an old opponent from Istvan V, Morlock Terminator, Ignatius Newman. Deafened from their last encounter, Newman would be immune to Marius's deadly sonically induced screams, using his deafness to end the wretch's life with a Volkite cannon to his chest, silencing Marius Voirosian once and for all.
Die, traitor!
The Iron Hand said. Xantine laughed and shot the Iron Hand in the chest. The bolt shell hit its target, but, fired so close, deflected off the curved breastplate before detonating. Still, it startled the Iron Hand, and Xantine took advantage, smashing the hilt of his sword into his helmet.
Traitor? New armor, new war gear, new monsters?
He cast a gaze up at the larger Primaris Marine.
And still the same old epithets. How boring.
He sliced once, twice, thrice at the Iron Hand. The first blows were feints, designed to imitate and distract, but the third struck home, shaving a chunk of ceramite from the Iron Hand's shoulder armor. Xantine ducked out of his opponent's extended reach. His falchion's grip held back, the sword's point alongside his cheek.
I am sure that your gene-meddling masters told you to say that, but consider for a moment. Am I truly the traitor here, child? Look at you.
Xantine straightened, casting the point of his sword the length of the taller warrior, from black-armored boot to the top of his cybernetic head.
You desecrate your flesh. You scrabble and claw to remove yourself from your creator's form, to separate yourself from the species you claim to defend. I touch, I taste, I see, I feel. You give yourself to the cold machine. You subsume your senses. You blaspheme against your creator.
The Iron Hand roared, a sound made cold in his machine throat. Xantine spun in response, whirling in high, low, then high again with his monomolecular blade. He scored another hit, his duelist form allowing him to strike up across the Aquila, emblazoned on the taller warrior's armor.
You wear that honor on your breast, and you know nothing of what it means. We alone earned it. Through perfection, we were judged the greatest, and we were afforded the highest honor by he who appointed himself our judge. But we transcended even his control.
Xantine served as a member of the Emperor's Children during the Horus Heresy. Present during the Battle of Istvan V and witness to the death of the Iron Hand's Primarch, Ferrus Manus, Xantine's apathy to the death of countless billions of souls and fascination with futile acts of loving self-sacrifice fueled his thirst for decadence and stimuli. Joining his kinsmen in their retreat from the throne world following the final battle of the Siege of Terra, for a time, Xantine contented himself upon the demon world of Harmony, which he regarded as the cultural heart of the galaxy. As lieutenant to the Chaos Lord, Euphoros, Xantine busied himself with aiding the schemes of the Spider, Fabius Bile, within the Canticle City, until the arrival of Ezekiel Abaddon and his band of killers, who in turn put Harmony to the torch. Defecting from his kinsmen during the Legion Wars in service of Abaddon the Despoiler, during his tenure as a member of the warband, known as the Children of Torment, Xantine grew restless among the ranks of the Black Legion. Discovering the imprisoned Slaanesh demon, Serjanth, upon the world of Calliope, Xantine freed the servant of She Who Firsts and allowed the fell creature to possess his body. Imbued with ruinous power, whilst the demon cohabited his form, Xantine challenged Euphoros to a duel, and after slaying his former master, broke free from the clutches of the Black Legion and formed his own warband, the Adored. alongside his stalwart noise marine brother, Varvisk, the word-bearer Diabolist, Koran-Tarn, and in time, fresh gene-forged Astartes, gifted by Fabius Bile to his cause, the Adored pillaged and raided the galaxy, seeking only to satiate their degenerate hungers. Armed with the power falchion, Anguish, Xantine ruled with no hesitation to cut down those who opposed him. The whispers of his beloved demon whispering lies into his mind. Growing once more bored with his mundane existence, Xantine ordered his vessel, the Exhortation, to the planet of Serene, orchestrating a plan to rule as the despot of this agri-world. Causing a warp accident and ambush of his vessel in order to strand his warband upon the Genestealer-infested world, the Adored purged the Xenos, captured their patriarch, and installed themselves as the new overlords of Serene. Forging gold masks fitted with gemstones to be worn by his most trusted lieutenants, the so-called Sophisticounts enacted his despotic will for 8 solar years until dissent grew within his warband. Refusing to become another mere remnant of his once proud legion, Xantine's stranglehold of Serene would nonetheless be threatened. Betrayed by his once loyal kinsman, Sarquil, the first of many detractors to the rule of Xantine caused a rift of unease between his men. The Diabolist Koran-Tarn would also incur the wrath of the Lord of Excess when tampering with Sejance's essence. Such meddling with the elements of the ruinous powers subsequently emboldened Cornate cultists of Serene to summon demons to combat the Adored. Confronted by his once loyal lieutenant, Torakon, during the Chaos, this gift of the Spider fused his already genetically perfected form with Sejanth and transformed into a near-perfect imitation of his genetic forebear, Fulgrim. Unleashing the captured Genestealer Patriarch as retribution against Torakon and his once cherished possessor, Xantine, after years of symbiosis with the entity, began to comprehend the comparative frailty of his form. Despite slaying Sarquil, Torakon, and Koran-Tarn, his loyal choirmaster, Varvisk, refused to betray him, despite knowing all along of his perfidy. Escaping the planet alongside Varvisk and those willing to remain at his side, Xantine watched as the Tyranids consumed the populace and those disloyal to his rule. His desire to be a despot of men, heretics, and sycophants undiminished from his meddling and hubris.
This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Each warrior of the so-called Perfect Legion allowed for pride to blind them of their own failures. Ignorant of their greatest weaknesses, the accolades of their former glory continue to embolden their actions despite their continued degeneration. Be wary of the allure of pride, for it is all too easy to allow one's successes to inflate your ego, and the path to damnation is all too often paved with the husks of past glories and phantom prestige.